Hey everyone, and welcome to Gutsy Media Podcast. My guest today is my longtime friend Ron Ward Jr. He is the bass player for the band Graceland's Ghost. Check out their latest music video in the description below. He picked 1987's Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors. But before we get into that, I want to kick off our fan contest where you can win all sorts of cool pop culture and movie related stuff. All you have to do to enter to win is to like, comment, and share 3 different social media posts of ours. That's Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook between January 20th and March 1st. A winner will be picked at random live on our YouTube channel March 27th. Terms and conditions apply. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. But without further ado, on with the show.
Sounds good.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you joining me here. So I try to leave it up to the guests to pick whatever movie they want. You chose A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. What drew you to this movie?
Well, first off, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's good to chat with you again. Honestly, I love horror movies. Funny that I would pick probably one of the cheesiest and worst ones that there is. But I need to say this first. I love my parents, and I have amazing parents. I have no qualms against them whatsoever. They're my best friends. But so I was like 4 or 5 when I saw this movie. And, you know, my father had just met my stepmom. She's an amazing person. So she was young. She was like 18, 19 years old at the time. And I saw the front cover as a 5-year-old. You saw the front cover, right? It's got the claws are out. I thought this man was like a wizard or a magician. Like my eyes filled with wonder. I was like, this is going to be amazing. And I feel like I simply just asked to watch it. My dad was like, oh, hell yeah. My stepmom was like, fuck it. It's, you know, the early 90s. Awesome. So they let me watch it. And honestly, there's a quote from Stephen King. He was referring to The Exorcist, but he said the first time you see something like that, you're not prepared for what you're looking at. That was the most perfect statement ever. I don't even think I knew people died at that point in life. So I'm just watching people get gutted on the screen like, holy shit, I don't know what's happening. And one of 2 things could have happened. I either loved horror movies or I hated them for the rest of my life. It scarred me for like 5 years. But after that, I grew to love them. And that movie has always held a special place.
You came back around. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I actually have a similar story. I was about 6 or 7 years old and my mom had to work nights. So my dad was like, yeah, we'll pop in a movie, you know, and it was the Poltergeist. Oh. And it was the same kind of idea. My dad had no idea what he was doing. We immediately, he literally the movie, and I was like, all right, time for bed. It was just nightmares.
And it changes your life.
It really does. I would say I'm a horror movie fan. Like I know a lot of people who are really into movies and really love horror movies. I don't dislike them. I tend to catch a couple a year. I actually never saw any of the Nightmare on Elm Streets. I mean, they're a huge part of pop culture, so I obviously knew about Freddy and I knew the storyline and the whole dream thing and everything. But
is this your first one?
This is the first one I actually sat down and watched beginning to end.
I'm so sorry.
It's definitely interesting. So the movie takes place in 1987. This is a year after the second movie, Nightmare on Elm Street: Freddy's Revenge, which is 5 years after the first movie. So the first movie takes place in 81, then 86, then 87. This is also the second movie that brings us back to the original director, or I should say writer. He's not credited as being a director, but the original white writer, Wes Craven, who did not take
legendary.
Part,
yep.
The legendary, exactly.
Yep.
He did not take part in the second movie because he, and I quote, did not think it would be a viable franchise. And then I guess with the success of the second one, he decides to come back in the third one.
Well, funny enough, so the first movie, I you have to check that one out. The first movie that's a masterpiece for horror. That's an actual probably good movie. The second one was panned. Like that is, everyone will tell you that's the worst movie in the whole series. I think what Wes was actually trying to do was he was kind of like, well, I didn't want this to be a franchise, but you guys fucked it up so bad. Like, let me try and save some face here.
So what made you want to do the third one then? Out of all of them, why the third one?
Like I said, that's the first one I saw. I love the first one so much, but there was something about the third one. And it's really funny because the third one is actually what like catapulted Freddy Krueger into like, icon status.
Yeah, the third one is the highest grossing movie of the franchise.
Yeah, I know the fourth one did well. At the time, the third one broke the record for like the highest grossing independent movie of all time, which that record's obviously been shattered now. But, in the 80s, it was a big deal because it was a small company. The third one, though, is like kids started dressing up. Like parents started dressing their kids up as Freddy Krueger for Halloween, which to this day, and I find it so hilarious because he's a child molester. Like, he was burned because he was a child molester, and parents are dressing their kids like, how did this happen?
So I got to ask, because I'm sure it'll come up several times. He is a child molester in the first movies. The remake repaints his backstory, wrongfully convicted. Come to find out, a child molester. What did you think of the remake?
Oh, you're treading on. So they tried to fix it. At the end of that movie, it ends up being like, oh, he actually was a terrible guy. So they tried to like throw a curveball in there. I love what they were going for. I think most people tend to hate remakes where I think they're just trying to keep the spirit alive, try and get, more youth involved, which that movie sucked. I don't want to I don't want to sit here and like pander to, you know what it was? And I always found it so interesting. So that you watch the first movie, there's a scene where Freddy Krueger comes through the wall a little bit. They cut out a hole in that wall and they put pantyhose on it and painted it. So it's a real guy coming through that wall. And it looks so cool. And then in the remake, they did like the Mummy where he comes out of the sand type deal in the wall. And it looked terrible. And it just goes to show you, like, when you're actually putting someone in that position and you're doing it for real, like how much changes. They just did so much with the graphics. It just ended up looking terrible. And I think it takes away from it.
A lot of people will point to movies like Avatar and say, look at what cinematography has done and CGI has done for the industry. And there are some phenomenal movies where the graphics nowadays have stepped up to a whole new level that make them look tremendously amazing. I mean, I go back to the newest of the three Star Wars. I forgot what the first one's called, but regardless, the graphics are just next level. They're just amazing. But you look at movies like this, where maybe the studio doesn't go full ham on the cost of the graphics, and they tend to take away. I mean, I agree with you. Some of these movies, early to mid 80s, where CGI wasn't a thing, and they had to kind of improvise with live puppets or, like you said, pantyhose and things like that. You do get more of a real sense, and I think that for the horror movie genre specifically, I think that adds a lot to the terror and the realism.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think horror movies are probably the genre where practical effects are the better route to go. If you want to suck somebody into the movie, like Star Wars, you have Jedis fighting in space with it's so much easier to fall in that. But if you're trying to tell a horror movie and invest people's fear into this, I think practical effects go so much farther.
Agreed. So the other interesting thing about the third one is that they bring back the character of Nancy, who is a large part of the first one, obviously, and not in the second one. So spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen the third Nightmare on Elm Street. And I'm going to jump. We'll cover the plot in a second, but I'm going to jump right to the end. Nancy dies in this one. And Wes Craven said that a big part of why he came back is because he wanted to be the one to kill off Nancy. It was his character, and he didn't think anybody else was going to do it right. Do you agree with her death in this movie?
Absolutely. Especially for like this kind of movie, because at that point, I think the only other main character from a horror movie I can remember dying is, Friday the 13th Part 2, where the main actress from the end of the first one comes back and she gets killed like right off the bat. And I think it was something that they just had not tested. I think that was, if you wanted to make an impact in a movie, kill off the favorite character.
Yeah.
And she, technically she does come back at Wes Craven's New Nightmare. It's obviously a different take, but they do bring her back because she's a fan favorite. But honestly, I had no qualms with that. I think that was kind of for a fan of the series, that was a shock. Like that was your money grab, your main person. And I think they did it well.
So I was a big fan growing up of like the Chucky's, Child's Play, and Puppet Master was one of the big ones I was hooked on when I was a kid. And when I say kid, it was ridiculous to say. I mean, I have a 6-year-old, and I couldn't think of him watching this. It'd be insane.
Same. Yep.
But anyway, I think part of me is when you look at the newer movies and they take again Chucky for example, and they make it kind of like a comedy. It's the Bride of Chucky and the Child of Chucky or whatever the hell the last one was called.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so over the top ridiculous. It's not even scary anymore. It becomes kind of like a dark comedy, and they do this unfortunately to Freddy as well in Freddy versus Jason and stuff like that. So I think part of me looks at something like that and says, well, you kind of have to. I mean, you could only be scared of this guy for so long before he starts kind of becoming a comedic version of himself. But the other part of me is sad to see that happen to some of the horror icons, like Mike Myers and stuff like that. As a horror fan, what do you think?
I think Friday the 13th probably is Friday the 13th and Halloween are the two that did it right. Like Jason is in every movie, he's always scary. Now have funny moments, when he picks up the sleeping bag with the girl in there and slaps it into a tree. But Halloween's another one where it was just like, this guy is constantly scary. He always has that essence about him. But those are also two characters that didn't talk.
Exactly.
I think for one thing, characters that have a voice, like you said, it's either they say nothing or they have a personality. And I think within horror, for some reason, that personality comes out as kind of humorous. Because Chucky, even in the first one, that motherfucker was hilarious. Like he would have the best one-liners before he killed somebody. Everybody was a bitch before they died. I'm not a fan of it becoming a wholehearted comedy. If you watch any of the Nightmare on Elm Street's past number 3, yeah, it's one of them. He pretends to be the Wicked Witch of the West, and I was like, it has to die. Like, this is it. This is over.
Somebody kill him.
3 was good. I thought they rode the line between like he'd have his one-liners, but at the same time you're like, this is not a guy that I would really want to meet in my dreams.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the big things they changed in the third one, based on some of the reading I've done, is that this is the first movie where it's not one person versus Freddy. In the other movies, it's one person and everybody else thinks they're just delusional or crazy or it's just nightmares or whatever. In this one, we have a gang of people. The dream, the dream warriors, if you will, hence the name. You got a group of people. One of them, Patricia Arquette. This is her first movie ever, which is insane because she is essentially next to Nancy, and I only include Nancy because she's from the previous films. She's the star of the movie. I mean, she's got more screen time than anybody else.
Which is awesome. Patricia Arquette. It's funny because I watch all these documentaries on horror movies. I actually found out that for writers, directors, and actors, it is the easiest genre to start in because it's the cheapest. So like you had Kevin Bacon's first role ever was Friday the 13th. And then you had Johnny Depp's first role was on Nightmare on Elm Street 1. So all these actors that went on to have legendary careers, they start out in these cheesy, campy horror flicks. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was a Nightmare on Elm Street 4. The writer of Lord of the Rings wrote a script for that movie. It didn't get accepted, but to think the Lord of the Rings director trying to make a Nightmare on Elm Street movie.
Yeah, that's crazy. So the director of this one is Chuck Russell. This is actually his first directorial movie, which is also insane. He goes on to do a couple big ones: The Mask, Eraser with Arnold Schwarzenegger. That's one of my favorite Arnold movies is Eraser, and probably next to True Lies. He also does The Scorpion King, which essentially kind of dips his career, and he's got a few after that, but nothing huge. That we already mentioned Patricia Arquette. And then we have the legendary, I'm going to butcher his name because I do that with everybody, Robert Englund.
Robert Englund, yeah.
So he is obviously most notably for playing Freddy Krueger. He's actually been in a ton of movies and TV shows, mainly playing either Freddy Krueger or just being the quintessential horror guy in the background. He's made a career out of being this. And again, like you said, many horror movie tropes come from movies like this. I'm going back to the guy who's in Candyman.
Candyman, yeah.
He's kind of made a career out of being the Candyman.
Yep. A lot of these do. Kane Hodder, who did a bunch of the Friday the 13th, that he's been in a bajillion movies as a stunt director or one of the main guys, and he's known as Jason. So it definitely sticks with him.
These movies, they have an immense cult following. I mean, prime example. So this is the third one. The budget on this film is about $4.5 million. It does close to 9 opening weekend, which, I mean, to double your budget, you're considered a winning movie just at that. But it goes on.
1987.
In 1980, exactly. It goes on to do 44.8 million, which, again, you look at this against box offices today where movies are doing close to $1 billion. It doesn't sound like a whole lot, but that's also with, a $10 million budget, $30 million budget. This does a 10 times its budget at the box office, which is insane. It's a nice, tight 96 minutes. As I've said many times on the podcast, I think 1.5 to 2 hours is perfect time for a movie. Anything less than that, and it might as well be a TV show. And anything more than that, and you got to slip me some coffee because I'm falling asleep. What do you think?
There are movies that push the limits of that time, like Titanic. Well, what was it, like 3 hours or something? But it's just such a fantastic movie. But yeah, I agree. I found that I get older, and probably just because I am old these days, if it's too long, I'd rather it was shorter, to be honest with you. For some reason, movies I find hard to sit through the whole thing. I also have a 7-year-old who's bouncing off the walls and throwing all of my belongings into the middle of the room. So I just don't have time.
Yeah, you ran out of popcorn. You might as well just kiss the rest of the movie goodbye.
Oh, it's gone before the credits roll on the beginning of the movie. Like,
so the movie follows Patricia Arquette's character. She is essentially committed to an insane asylum, mainly because her mother thinks she's suicidal. It's actually, this is a great example of these classic 80s movies where the plot doesn't go too deep. I call these movies that you can't scratch the surface on. Within the first 10 minutes of the movie, her character her name's Kristen Parker, has a run-in with Freddy, and basically Freddy ends up cutting her wrists. Well, when her mom finds her mom thinks that she's tried to commit suicide and has her more or less committed to an insane asylum. I don't think they call it that. They call it just like a hospital or whatever, but it's a psychiatric ward of a hospital. I don't remember, at least, if they talked about why her character and Freddy have this connection. I know that Nancy goes on later to explain that these are like the last of the kids of the original group that killed him. Is she playing to that too?
Yeah, so that's essentially like they're the last of the Elm Street kids. Now, obviously, they're not, because there's like 8 movies after it. But yeah, they're supposedly like their parents were the last in that group that murdered Freddy, before he became who he was. And so, one of the big bad takeaways for the movie, which you kind of alluded to, which is funny, is that nobody ever gave a shit about the characters. They never gave them time. So a lot of people were like, well, we don't care that they're dying. But then you're like, well, you're not supposed to. Like, they're like,
I'm here to watch Freddy. I don't care
about
them. So the funny part is that her mom is in the film. She obviously shows up in the beginning. And
shittiest parent in the whole world.
Shittiest parent in the whole world. But on top of that, they never go back to explaining, like, if she's one of the Elm Street kids, wouldn't her mom have been involved in Freddy's death, or was it her dad? Maybe I don't know. Either way, again, one of those you can't scratch the surface. She shows up.
You're thinking too much, bro.
She shows up in the hospital. She meets a like-minded group of misfits, and they all seem to be having sleep problems. Although to this point, they haven't really pieced together the connection. Other than they all must suffer from some sort of similar illness. I think the doctor just says it's collective psychosis. It just happens to be that you guys are all suffering from the same thing. And we are then introduced to Nancy. She is a new intern. One of the things I do really like about this is that based on her history with Freddy, it's funny to see her then, 6 years later, go on to trying to be a therapist, specifically a sleep therapist, which I thought played really well in her backstory.
Yep, I agree. The way they brought her back was probably the best way that you could. Side tangent, just because you talked about, you mentioned about them meeting at the hospital. How about Lawrence Fishburne?
Oh my God!
Out of nowhere,
an early role for him.
The only role he had before that was Cowboy Kenny or whatever it was in Pee-wee Herman's. Yeah, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. And then after this, obviously, he goes on to The Matrix. But I loved his character. But yeah, the introduction of Nancy, I thought, was absolutely perfect. She still had the gray streak in her hair, which she gets in A Nightmare on Elm Street 1. Funny though, like, would you trust her as your sleep therapist? Like, is she doing a lot of sleeping?
Yeah, probably not. She does mention she's on some sort of medication that prevents her from dreaming, which, I mean, I guess I can't blame her for that. I totally would be too.
She's damaged goods.
Exactly. So she, with help from the doctor, discovers that, so she gets pulled. So I'm getting ahead of myself. Patricia Arquette's character has a dream involving Freddy, and she's able to pull Nancy into the dream, which is apparently a power that she has. Again, they don't go into detail about what this power is, how she got it. Is it hereditary? Is it? They
talk about it a little bit. She used to pull her dad in the dreams when she was a kid.
Right. And then he would tell her about the dream, and she kind of wouldn't say anything but so Nancy, now understanding that Freddy is back and after these kids, essentially is going to try to help them. And while she is trying to help them, while she's trying to convince the doctors what's really happening, and we'll come back to that in a second, you have the classic one at a time, somebody dies. This is usually a trope in a lot of horror movies. It's a trope in a lot of movies, horror or not. But this is that, okay, we're going to give you 2 or 3 deaths, and we're going to give them to you in a really cool, weird way. And that's usually what people like in the audience. The first one, which is horrifying, is a kid who essentially gets his nerves ripped out of his body and is played as a puppet by Freddy. Oh my God. Classic gore horror movie. I love it.
You got to think of not even just the people who are thinking of this, but the guy that was in charge of the makeup effects. I thought the makeup was so, like, they did the close-up shot of his feet with the veins being ripped out. It was so good looking, and it's fun. The stop motion animation, or the stop clay animation that they did for Freddy when he is the puppet for a second, actually looks pretty good.
So they filmed that backwards. They had a clay face of Freddy, and they slowly smoothed it out in like a stop motion animation. So when you see it, it looks like it's a basic clay doll forming into Freddy, when it's actually the opposite. I thought great shooting. The cinematography in this movie is awesome. I think horror movies don't get enough credit for the cinematography. You do get a lot of makeup, great makeup artists come out of horror movies because you have so much, blood, gore, zombies, so on and so forth. But when it comes to cinematography, that was just a genius thought process, especially in '87.
They did that a couple times. So the scene where Patricia Arquette gets eaten by the Freddy worm, that was all backwards too. She was actually crawling out of it. Then they, but she's actually getting sucked in. So they actually did that a couple times in this movie.
It's great. It's unbelievable. So while this is happening, while you have these, these kids getting knocked off, the Patricia Arquette's character is going to the 2 doctors who are in charge of the group. And you have the classic one doctor, no, absolutely not. You're crazy. I know what these kids need, and I'm going to forcefully give it to them. While the other one is like, I'll hear you out. And it slowly gets on board and helps her. That's when things start to get a little crazy. They end up going back to Nancy's father. Now, I don't know any of the history because, again, I didn't see the first 2 movies. Can you go into a little bit of detail as far as how is Nancy's father kind of connected to this, and why is their relationship so tattered at this point?
So basically, and I guess it's probably a plot hole, because if Patricia's mom was a part of Freddy being killed, which is, kind of what they're insinuating, they basically say that Nancy's dad, John Saxon, by the way, who's an absolute legendary actor, they basically said he's the last person that would know about Freddie being killed. So the story goes that Nancy's dad is the one that buried his body. That was in charge of getting rid of the evidence. So yeah, he's from the first one. He's a police officer on the first one in the town of Springwood. All the kids start dying. He never, ever believes Nancy the entire time. Everyone's getting murdered. Johnny Depp's getting sucked in the beds, like wild shit's happening. And he's the one that kind of locks Nancy in the house at the end and is like, you're not coming outside. You're fucking crazy. So obviously at the end of that movie, their relationship is tattered. He never believed Nancy. She never believed him. All the kids died. So I'm sure he got fired from his job.
But he's a cop in this one.
He has the badge on. That doesn't,
unless like he got fired and went right to the bar, then he's been there.
He just never left. Yeah. So yeah, he's the last person that they can go to find out about Freddie's backstory.
And he does. He offers the information and decides to take the good doctor to the body. So at this point, the good doctor and Nancy split up. Nancy has to rush back to the hospital to save the kids from the evil doctor and essentially Freddie, because the evil doctor is basically saying, I say evil, I mean, the doctor that
she wasn't that bad.
She wasn't that bad. The doctor that doesn't believe Nancy is essentially forcefully separating these kids and is saying, listen, we're just going to carry on with what we've been doing. And
you glossed over one part though.
Uh-oh.
So I needed to talk about this because it's probably my favorite scene.
DFAT Comics is the publishing branch of Don'tForgetATowel.com, the only place to travel geekly. Focusing on creator-owned and independent titles like Hollowed, Pursuit of Plastic, and Fairy, and many more. DFAT Comics will be a mix of genres appealing to every kind of reader. Join the new source of comic book entertainment with DFAT Comics.
It is so fucked up on every level when they make them fall asleep to see what their dream powers are. They're like, for one, we don't know if this is going to work, but you kids should all fall asleep in this room. And they're like, yeah, okay. Like,
yeah,
isn't
not?
that? And then
it's done us well so far.
The dream powers, the lamest fucking shit. Like, when do you have a dream when you're like, I can do 8 cartwheels? Like, this is fucking awesome.
So let's run through them. We got Patricia Arquette's character. Her dream power is not, so she has the ability to pull people into her dreams. Mm-hmm. That's not her dream power. Her dream power is that she is an acrobat, apparently. And she
not even a good one though. I don't even think she's Olympic level. Like, my sister can do as many cartwheels as this. Like, this is what you dream of.
We then have Jennifer Rubin, who's in this movie as well. She plays Taryn.
Yep.
Her dream power is that she can wear a punk uniform, put her hair into a mohawk, and she carries around knives.
Yeah,
she's not good with the knives at all. Because she does get into a fight with Freddie, and Freddie gets the best of her. She also, there's like a subplot here where she's like a former junkie.
Mm-hmm.
This subplot there's no reason for it in the movie whatsoever. They touch on it briefly during one of the like group like therapy sessions. They then have a throwaway scene where her and an orderly bump into each other in the hallway, and the orderly basically says, hey, let's sneak off and get high and bang. And she's like, leave me alone. And then the only other time they reference it is when her and Freddie fight, at which point Freddie turns his blades into syringes and then injects her in the arm. They also had this disgusting scene where the former like shoot up spots on her arm turn into these like suckling
little mouths. Yeah.
Oh,
which
God,
it actually was a cool kill. I actually like that kill, but yeah, there's no subtext whatsoever. It's like they're just going to throw that in there so they could use it as a kill later.
Absolutely.
But,
which I'm for. I thought it was like, I'm with you. I think that was one of the coolest kills in the movie. Anything that can make me cringe. I'm not a jump scare person. It's too easy to pop out of a closet and get me to give a jump scare. Show me something that's cringeworthy. The tendons, playing it like a puppet, the syringes in the arms, all that stuff. I like that stuff. So she's a punk rocker that has knives.
With knives, yeah.
Knives. Then we got Kincaid. He is super strong.
Is he? He bends a chair like.
He he breaks through drywall. I mean, drywall is pretty tough.
The Kool-Aid Man made a fucking career out of doing that. Like, these dream powers to me were like, God, that was the cringiest part. And by the way, Kincaid, and he said it himself in interviews, was the first African-American to survive at the end of a horror movie.
That's true. Yeah, because he does survive. I don't know if he was the first, but it's definitely not a
that's his quote.
So we have...
That's his dream power.
Surviving. We then have Joey, who is... He's a mute. He's quiet in the movie for whatever reason. His dream power is that he can talk in the dreams or sing or yell or whatever it was.
Hold on. His first dream power is my dream power. He's like, all right, fuck all this. I'm going to go bang that hot nurse over there. Like, I know I would have fucked up like that. Like that, I would have been like, this is it. Like
that's a great scene. So they have this moment where they all decide, like you said, okay, we're going to pass out together and see what our dream powers are. And the very next scene is them waking up, essentially convinced it didn't work. Now, obviously, we all know as audience members, it totally worked and they're dreaming right now, but they don't know that. Seconds after waking up and the group is having this conversation, he looks out the door and this nurse is like, hey, come over here. I want to sleep with you. And he's like, all right, well, this seems like a good time to break away from the group and try to get lucky. Oh, it's great.
That's my spirit animal in that movie is Joey.
And then who's the last one that is it? Not Neil. Neil's the other doctor. There's one more kid. I want to say
the Wizard Master. I can't remember his name offhand.
I read a little tidbit that he got the role. Now, mind you, this is 1987. He got the role because he's one of the only actors that tried out that actually did play D&D. So he knew the lingo.
Looks like it.
He knew the lingo, and his dream power is that he is an actual wizard. Now,
he's the Wizard Master.
Probably is one of the most useful dream powers out of the group because he can literally manifest things in front of him, which saves him from being killed by Freddy at one point. He uses it once again, he's a Wizard Master and he's like, here's a fucking butterfly. Like, let's do this. Like, I don't get it. So Nancy goes back to the hospital. She attempts to help the 4 or 5 remaining dream wizards, dream warriors that are there. And they go into the dreams and they use their dream powers to fight Freddy there, while simultaneously the good doctor is uncovering the body and attempting to bury it because he has been told by a nun who has shown up that we finally in the third movie get the backstory on Freddy, where Freddy came from, which is probably one of the most horrific backstories and one of the best backstories for a bad guy. I mean, okay, so you got Michael Myers randomly flips out when he's 6, kills his whole family, and has to come back 30 years later to kill his sister. You got Jason, who is bullied as a child and then dies at camp by the counselors and comes back for revenge. If anything, I'm on Jason's side there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Freddy. Now, we find out in this movie that Freddy's mother worked at this insane asylum, the same one that they are currently residing in. She is locked in the ward over a long weekend for whatever reason. And during that time is repeatedly abused and raped by these inmates. She then gets pregnant. And Freddy is the offspring of 1,000 mental patients, essentially.
He's the bastard son of 100 maniacs. Yeah, there you
go. That becomes the tagline for Freddy Krueger. Which, I mean, again, it's awful. It's absolutely awful. But you want an awful backstory for your main bad guy.
Yeah,
I mean,
it invokes no sympathy. No sympathy, which you could almost find it even in Michael Myers, especially when you go back to like Rob Zombie's remake. You're like, yeah, this kid had a horrible childhood. Obviously, didn't do that in the original, but there's almost always some sympathetic, connotation behind a lot of these villains. Because they try to make him relatable. You don't relate to Freddy on any, like, if you relate to Freddy on any level, like, you probably are just not a good person. So
yeah, I mean, so the idea here is that he is pure evil from the moment of conception, not even like the moment of birth, the moment of conception. He's pure evil, which is insane. But anyway, so long story short, the good doctor finds the body, attempts to bury it. During the process, Freddy is able to kind of get control of his bones again.
that's a plot hole. That's a big plot hole that they just grazed over. Like, if you could enter the real world at any time, why
would you do that? I mean, I guess being a stack of bones probably isn't the easiest way to go around killing people, but
he's the most badass skeleton I've ever seen. Was he doing like roundhouse kicks and like it was like a fucking ninja? I don't know. He beat the hell out of those two guys, and then he did like that victory dance at the end. I was like, all right, let's see what you guys are doing.
So then he ends up killing Nancy's father.
Yeah, he throws him right into an old car that like pierces through his chest or something.
So he dies. I'm sure, because I know, nobody comes back from the dead in movies, that he probably doesn't come back in any of the remaining films.
He does.
Go figure.
Well, so the thing is, so not to get into it, but Wes Craven's New Nightmare, Wes Craven came back and he was like, you guys totally fucked Freddy Krueger up. What he does is he takes Freddy Krueger and puts him in the real world. Like, Robert Englund is Robert Englund in that movie as an actor. Nancy Thompson is Heather Langenkamp as the actress. And they make it like, what if Freddy was real? Like, what if somehow that essence became real? So yeah, all of them are in it, but they're the actual actors, like Heather Langenkamp, John Saxon. It's actually a great movie. He wanted to end it not shitty. And it's actually a pretty cool thing. So that's how they come back. It's not like they're revived magically.
I'll have to check that out. It sounds good. So the good doctor is able to find the bones and bury it, while simultaneously they are fighting Freddy in the dreams. Freddy gets one up on Nancy, stabs her. Eventually she succumbs to her stabbing. And it's like a double-sided, killing of Freddy. They kill him in the dreams, and they also kill him in the real world. Now, obviously, the real world is what really does it, because at the point where he's being buried and holy water is being spread on him, you see him kind of dissolve in the dream. And then you find out at the very end that the nun who was able to give the good doctor this piece of information that you have to find the body and bury him if you want to, really kill Freddy. You find out that was the mother. That was the nun that was locked in there, which is, again, just another great level of storytelling, where you had the mom that, we were both parents, and to know that your child is so evil that you contribute to its ultimate demise, that's a big thing. And I really liked that layer of storytelling there.
You went really hard on that. I never thought that. Like, cool. That's food for thought. Now I'm going to look at my kid a different way. Like, you better not. I actually never, thought of it from her perspective, but it definitely is cool, especially because in the beginning of seeing her, you definitely know, like, she's probably otherworldly, because she vanishes and whatever. But to come to find out that was actually the mother of Freddy, I thought was a really cool, like, if you were going to make a good story based on this, I thought that they did a good job.
Yeah, I think the movie, so that actually brings us to a really good point. For season 2 of the podcast, we actually have a purpose now. We didn't have a purpose in season 1. We were wandering aimlessly through the realms of the nightmares. Our purpose is, when it comes to these movies, we have to determine, is it a good movie? And the best part about that question is that it's so dependent on the individual person. I've talked many times about movies that are just dripped in backstories and character depth and character development. And then you have other movies, such as this and some of the other movies that we've talked about, that you just can't scratch the surface on. Just watch it for what it is and don't ask any questions. And some people, a lot of critics, I get the question a lot, why are the critics' opinions of movies always so different than the normal audience members? And I think it's because of how you look at the movie. You can look at a movie and you can look at storytelling and cinematography and the lighting and the actors and rip a movie apart. And then you can look at the movie and not look at any of that stuff and just look at the story in front of you and love it. And so it brings us back to our purpose. Was this a good movie? And we have developed 3 questions that we ask all of our guests as it pertains to the movie, and that will hopefully help us answer that question. Was it a good movie? So are you ready? Are you ready to play the 3 questions?
What if I have questions for you?
I am all about it. Nobody ever asked me questions. I'm all about it.
That's what I'm curious of. So I do have one for you, because we cannot gloss over the kills. What was your favorite kill and why?
Ooh, that's tough. I mean, I have to go with so there is a female in the cast of the Dream Warriors.
Yes,
and,
let's do this.
She is an aspiring actress. At one point we talked about Lawrence Fishburne. At one point in the movie, she is up late watching TV in kind of like their little rec room. And Lawrence Fishburne walks in. He's like, "Oh, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble if you're in here." And she's like, "Please, just let me watch the movie or let me watch TV." And he's like, "Fine, but don't tell anybody I saw you." And he leaves. And Freddy appears and basically picks her up as like the TV and slams her head into the TV, and then she's left because the TV's mounted to the wall, so she's left kind of like hanging from the TV. It was just a really, really cool kill. He's got that classic one line where I think he calls her like a bitch or something. Because
that line is legendary. Robert Englund has said that when he signs autographs, that is the most asked for line.
Really?
That is the number one greatest kill in all of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Like when they do rankings, that was a legendary kill. He says, "Welcome to primetime, bitch," and slams her head into the TV as he is the TV. And it is, if you haven't seen it, you have to just watch that kill.
It was a good one. It was definitely a good one. I mean, the other ones were cringeworthy. In fact, I actually think most of the kills in this movie were pretty cool. I mean,
except for the Wizard Master, his whole fucking thing was lame. Like,
can't give him any credit.
No, not at all. But that line, that movie in general, just had so many like good lines, and everybody says "Welcome to Primetime, bitch" is their favorite. But to be honest, when Freddy kills Patricia Arquette's mom,
that's a good one.
That is my favorite in the whole movie, and no one talks about it because I just feel like it resonates so well. Because you hear a guy in the background. So she's talking to her daughter, talking her in, but obviously it's a dream. And you hear in the background some guy go, "Hey, where's the bourbon?" And the mom goes, "I'll be right down." Mom and daughter are having this heart-to-heart. And then all of a sudden she gets dragged away off screen. And then Freddy comes in and he goes, "I asked, where's the fucking bourbon?" And he chops her head off. I was like, this is prime. Like, this is quality entertainment.
I agree 100%. Okay, so question number 1, as it pertains to 1987's Nightmare on Elm Street Dream Warriors. What was the message of the film, and do you agree with it?
You know what's funny is if you listen to the writers and directors, there actually is a lot of backstory that they put into it. The second one was actually a gay / AIDS understory, which you would never know that unless you were like deep in thought. This one, I have no clue. Like, don't assume your kids are crazy and send them off to an insane asylum. Like, I just think it shows, if you want to get like really deep into it, it just shows like who you should and shouldn't be as a parent. All of the parents in all of these movies are just absolutely horrible. They don't listen to their kids. Their kids are going through a lot. So if I were to take anything of it, it would be to be a better parent and actually listen to my kid. You know, I remember even being young and being scared of something, or something would happen. Once again, not to throw my parents under the bus, but it was kind of like, fucking suck it up and go to bed, which I find myself doing at times. But then there's times where you think like, let's stop, listen to our kids, because they have something to say too, because to them, that's a real feeling that they're having of being scared. So honestly, like, if I had to take a message, I want to be a better parent. I don't, you know what I mean?
Amazing. One thing we learned from Freddy Krueger: be a better parent. I love it.
There you go.
I love it.
And yeah, I do agree with that message. So.
Okay, question number 2. How did the movie leave you feeling? And do you think this was intentional?
So obviously the very end of it, they have the little house and the light flicks on. So, I mean, that feeling of like hopefulness that like they're going to do another one, because I love these movies. To me, like a horror movie, like you don't have to, like you said, just take it at surface value. To me, it's fun. My kid asked me why I like horror movies, and I just said, they're fun. Like, do I want to go out and murder somebody? Sometimes, but not like that. But they're just fun. I can go into another world. It's just different. It's fun to watch. So that feeling of wanting there to be another one sometimes definitely is there. Now they went on to fuck the whole thing up, and I wish that they hadn't made more. But at the time, yeah, I think, watching it was kind of like, oh man, like Freddy's not really dead. Like, what's the next one going to be like?
Yeah, I love that. And the best part about that is, I remember a lot growing up when it comes to especially the 80s, the 90s. You'd have movies like this where they left you that little glimmer of hope, and you really didn't know, was there going to be another movie? Because for a movie to go on to do a trilogy was, once every so often, and it wasn't even guaranteed at the start. Nowadays, you have to leave the movie open-ended, because almost every movie goes on to make a sequel or at least a trilogy, if not 6, 12 movies. I mean, we didn't have that back then. 3 was your limit. Once you hit 3 movies, unless you were an anomaly, that was it.
You're dead on. Like, I think the trilogy thing was like, if you got to 3, you knew it was done. But it's funny because I feel like people hate sequels now. I think it's so overdone and oversaturated that you're like, sometimes a good movie just needs to end. But I remember being little, and I don't know if it's a younger thought, but I didn't want the movies to end. I remember, like, I'll just take for like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies in the 90s were phenomenal. Even though they got progressively worse and worse, it was like, please just do another one. Like, you can fix this. And now it's like, God, stop fucking making movies.
Yeah, it gets overwhelming when every movie's got a sequel. I think what made the sequel great was you didn't know it was coming. It was like a reward. You found out 5 years later, oh my God, we're getting a sequel because you see the trailer randomly either on TV or in front of a movie. Now it's like opening weekend of the first movie, you hear, oh, they've greenlit, 2, 3, and 4. It's like, oh, great. Well, now I know that 2's not going to end with any sort of interesting things.
100%. And like you just said, 5 years later, now it's like within a year, the next movie's out.
And we can all thank the Marvel Universe for that. Okay, question number 3. What is the most important sequence in the movie?
That's a tough one. So it depends on if you resonated with the kids or if you resonated with Freddy, which I think most people resonate with Freddy. The backstory, the fact that there was a backstory even in it, the bastard son of 100 maniacs, I think was probably like eye-opening. Like, they actually gave Freddy character, whereas before he was just, the antagonist. And now all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, this is why he does it. This is what's happening. Like, even if he was a bad guy, like, this dude just from the start did not have a good shot at life. Yeah,
that's really well put. I mean, again, not having watched these movies at the time they came out, or even, in the last 20 years, I always knew that. I always knew that, that backstory. But when you hear it as part of a third movie, and then he didn't have that up until then, I can understand why that would be such a resonating part of the movie. Okay, so based on those 3 questions, I mean, I feel like I don't have to ask, but I'm going to. Was this a good movie?
Like you said, that is really subjective to like the person. If you don't like horror movies or you don't like campy movies, no. In regards to, like, I picked such a shitty movie. Like, if you ever want to do this again, let me know. Like, I'll get a better one. But it was a good movie for what it was. I have a lot of fun watching it. It brings back a lot of memories. I think there's a lot of cool shock value to it. But, there's a million other movies I would pick over it if I wanted to, like, open my eyes to, like, world views. It wouldn't be this one. But, yeah, for what it was, if you want to watch an 80s horror movie, this is probably my go-to.
I could not agree more. My take on this, was it a good movie? Yes. And the reason why I say that is because you can't take a movie out of its context. You can't watch a movie you can't watch Casablanca now and compare it to Avatar or Titanic. I mean, it's just, you can't do that. But I think if you take this for what it is, as a 1987 horror movie, especially one with a cult, following of Freddy Krueger, it was definitely a good movie. It adds so much context to the characters, really adds to the story. It's not just another Here's Freddy killing people. I think it's a great movie.
And I don't think you can understate the fact that like the cultural impact that it had. You know, when kids to this day, I know somebody who just posted a picture of their 6-year-old in a Freddy costume. Like all of a sudden, Freddy's everywhere. You know what I mean? He's doing interviews as Freddy on, all these talk shows. He had a TV series that came after this.
I saw that.
It's just, there's t-shirts, Walmart. I bought a shirt at Walmart that had Freddy and Jason chilling on a fucking like float in a lake. So it had a cultural impact, whether you like it or not. It was successful.
Absolutely. So I do have another game for you. As you may or may not be aware, Rotten Tomatoes tends to grade all of its movies. You have both the critic score and the audience score. So what I like to do is play a little game called Guess That Tomato.
Oh God.
So in Guess That Tomato, I asked my guests if they will guess the audience score for the movie that we're talking about. That movie, 1987, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. What is your guess for the audience score? 1 to 100.
That one was one of the more successful ones. I'm gonna somewhere in probably the high 70s range, like 78, 79. I don't think it would hit 80, but it shouldn't be below 75.
Okay, so we'll go with like about 78.
78.
78. Okay, the tagline for this movie: if you think you'll get out alive, you must be dreaming. Oh, that's such a dad joke right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the critic score. 36 critics rated this movie as 72. The audience score was made up of 304,000 people. Holy cow.
Damn. Yeah.
I'm also going to give you 3 movies that are within 2% of this movie's rating. So plus or minus 2%. Here are the 3 movies. Zombieland Double Tap, the sequel to Woody Harrelson and Jesse Eisenberg's R-rated post-apocalyptic zombie comedy. World War Z, Mark Foster's very loose adaptation of the best-selling post-apocalyptic zombie journal starring Brad Pitt. And American Psycho, an insane movie starring Christian Bale as a serial killer? Question
I love
mark?
that movie, by the way.
Such a great movie. Oh my God. So a buddy of mine who's huge into movies, we watched that a couple years back together in the barracks. And I just couldn't get past the little one-liners where like he has a whole montage of the business cards and the certain color the business card is. And it's just such a great movie.
I have a question.
Christian Bale at his peak. That is the
100%.
best acting you get out of him is in that movie.
I don't want to get into it. That's like another show, but the very end, do you think all of that happened or no?
I don't think it matters. I think
I feel like you dodged the question.
I think the best part about that movie is that even if it didn't happen, it still tells you how crazy this individual is. I mean, obviously if it happened, he's a serial killer and is insane. But even if it didn't happen, I think he's moments away from making it happen. Like he's such a deranged, and Christian Bale plays that to a T. Phenomenal movie. But with those 3 movies in mind, do you want to change your guess?
Damn it. Why are we doing this? Like American Psycho has to be rated high. Like that was great. I know that World War Z, I think that got rated pretty low. And Double Tap, I actually never saw that one. The first one was good, but sequels are never rated as high. No, because if I change it, it won't be by much. Like you said, 2%. So if I were to change it, I would make it an 80 or 75. So no, I'm going to keep it 78.
So the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes for Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors is 68%.
What?
Yeah, it's not that high. I'm surprised.
Bad.
That's crazy.
All right, cut this whole section out. I'm not.
What's funny is the other movies, this is the highest of them. So the new Nightmare is the second highest at 66%, but the other ones are in like the 30s.
No way.
Yeah.
What's American Psycho at?
American Psycho's at 70, I believe. But I meant the other Nightmare on Elm Streets. The
Oh, yeah,
second
no, that
one
makes
is
sense.
33.
Yeah,
Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare, is at a
should be a
33.
12.
It's crazy.
So Wes Craven's A New Nightmare, A Nightmare 3, and A Nightmare 1. Those are the three that everyone loves. So I have to assume that those are the top.
So with that being said, it's a firm belief of the owners that Don't Forget a Towel that everybody geeks out on something. While it might not be comic books and movies, maybe it's, Freddy Krueger and slaughtering nuns in psychiatric wards. So I got to ask you, what is it you're geeking out on right now
In real life?
in real life?
Music. Music. So, we've talked about it before. I'm obsessed with being able to play. I have a band right now called Graceland's Ghost, and it's literally, besides my kid, it's all consuming. I absolutely love being able to create music. It's one of the greatest gifts that I've ever had the pleasure of being given in life. I would suggest hand all of your kids a guitar as soon as you can.
So what kind of music do you guys play?
It's really hard to describe it. So somewhere along rock, ambient, indie type stuff like that. We've been compared to like Goo Goo Dolls or Death Cab for Cutie, stuff like that.
Wow, that's great.
We had a single come out a couple months ago called Prisms. We have a new album coming out, hopefully the beginning of 2021. I actually have learned through doing this never to put a timeline on things because you'll disappoint everybody. This album was supposed to come out like a year ago, so we just stopped telling people. But yeah, Graceland's Ghost. I that's it, man. My kid sits around and listens to it now. It's just, it's so cool. It's my life is just making music at this point.
Well, that's great, Ron. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for talking to me about the movie. I mean, give me your 60-second rundown. Where can we find you? Where can we hear the single? Where can we buy the album?
Well, I appreciate you giving me the time. Like I said, Graceland's Ghost. Search us up on YouTube. We also have Spotify. Our first album's on there. We released 3 years ago. New singles called Prisms. It's on YouTube right now. We're gonna have another single coming out soon. So hopefully we can get you guys all the music needs that you want. I appreciate anybody who listens. I think even if you didn't enjoy it, it's just cool that somebody gave us a shot. So I appreciate it.
Find the link in the description below, guys. Again, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Have a good one.
You too.
You've got Gutsy Media Podcast. Leave a message about any movies you covered, and maybe we'll add to the show. Thanks.
Hey, this is Armando. I was just calling in to say that I think, unpopular opinion time, that the best Nightmare on Elm Street movie of the franchise undoubtedly is got to be Nightmare on Elm Street 3. It is by far the best. It has an all-star cast. The plot is done well. The directing is good. It's got everything that we want. Action. It's got the backstory for Freddy. It completes it. Then they go and ruin it by doing other ones. But this one here is the most complete picture out of all of them. Unpopular opinion. Everybody in my sci-fi catalog and all my chat rooms agree. I think it's the best. They think it's the best. Why doesn't other people think the same thing? Anyway, over to you. Armando out.